The President of Venezuela's National Assembly presented evidence this Tuesday of the lies and manipulation of former opposition lawmakers used to justify the theft of the nation's assets seized in the United States. The Bolivian government launched an international campaign this Tuesday to demand the waiver of patents for vaccines and drugs against COVID-19. Somalia's lower house of parliament on Monday voted to extend the president's mandate for 2 years, a move slammed as unconstitutional. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm GLADYS QUESADA. The President of Venezuela's National Assembly presented evidence this Tuesday of the lies and manipulation of former opposition lawmakers used to justify the theft of the nation's assets seized in the United States. In a press conference, Jorge Rodriguez pointed out that an extreme sector of the opposition, headed by Juan Guaidó and protected by Washington, are trying to set up a scenario to promote the theft of more than $53 million seized by the United States government by seeking to manipulate figures so that the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control approves the move. Jorge Rodriguez stressed that the seized assets could be used to purchase much-needed vaccines for millions of citizens. This Tuesday, Venezuela celebrates the 19th anniversary of the heroic deed carried out by the Venezuelan people on April 13, 2002, when their mass mobilization reversed the coup against then-President Hugo Chavez. From the early hours of that April the 30th, a huge number of citizens in different parts of the country took to the streets to demand the return of Commander Hugo Chavez, who had been abducted by coup plotters sponsored by the United States. The coup plotters launched their action on April 11th, illegally taking over the Miraflores presidential palace, where businessman Pedro Carmona Estanga proclaimed himself interim president of the nation. Due to the huge popular pressure and the support of progressive military ranks, in less than 48 hours the revolutionary leader returned to his post, and the constitutional order of the country was recovered. Ecuadorians reacted to President-elect Guillermo Laso's pledge to vaccinate 9 million people against COVID-19 in the first 100 days of his government.
What we ask is the new President Guillermo Lasso is that he fulfills those 100 days of coronavirus vaccination, a promise made by Lasso. For example, I am already an old man, but I am not on the list of people to be vaccinated, so I would ask him to comply. The main thing is to comply, sir, not just words, but compliance. COVID-19 cases continue increasing at a national level. Currently, in Ecuador, more than 328,000 cases are officially registered. But we know that this number is far from reality. We have observed that excess deaths have already exceeded 50,000 so far since the pandemic. In recent weeks, the famous RT, the effective reproductive number, which is the basic number of reproduction, has risen in more or less 60 of the 221 municipalities of Ecuador, which shows that the pandemic is worsening.
Vaccination against COVID-19 in 100 days will be one of the greatest solutions he, the newly elected president, can give to the pandemic problem that is killing so many people, taking so many lives, people who have nothing to do with the poverty that plagues them. If the president complies with his proposals and his goals, Ecuadorians will be immensely grateful.
While a series of audits are yet to be undertaken before the absolute final outcome of Sunday's general elections in Peru is announced, according to the court, so far, the presidential candidate for the Free Peru National Political Party, Pedro Castillo, secured over 19% of the vote. A second-round vote to define the president and vice president is scheduled for June the 6th, with a total of 18 candidates vying for a place. According to the results released so far by the National Office of Electoral Processes, with over 96% of votes counted, Keiko Fujimori of the far-right Popular Force Party is in second place, with over 13.3% of the vote. Almost tied in a third place are Rafael López Aliaga of the Popular Renewal Party with 11.68% and Hernando de Soto of the Go and Country Party with 11.62%. 5.1% of ballots have been declared null so far, while 12.4% were blank. Meanwhile, of the 20 parties running for the 130 seats in Congress, and with 91% of votes counted, the Free Peru National Political Party and the Popular Force Party have secured the most votes. In Colombia, the dead bodies of at least 3 people have been identified in a new massacre in the department of Nariño. The deceased were identified as Gabriel Montaño Quiñones, Diodio Martín Peralta Vázquez, and Eider Elicio Prado, who had been missing since April the 6th when they traveled to a sector of the municipality of Tumaco to carry out agricultural work. Police authorities reported that their bodies were found with gunshot wounds. Local residents pointed to the existence of armed groups and criminal gangs that are disputing control of the territory. The Institute for Development and Peace Studies reported that the latest violent incident was the 28th massacre registered in the country so far this year. In the United States, the police officer who fatally shot 20-year-old black man down to right during a traffic stop in the Minneapolis suburb of Brooklyn Center has resigned, together with the city's police chief. Brooklyn Center Mayor Mike Elliott announced the resignations in a press conference this Tuesday. Kim Potter, a 48-year-old officer and a 26-year-old veteran of the department, submitted her letter of resignation on Tuesday morning. The mayor noted she had not been asked to resign. Police Chief Tim Gannon also resigned on Tuesday. Meanwhile, City Manager Kurt Bogeny was fired after disagreed with the mayor that the officer responsible for Wright's death should be dismissed. Protesters gathered for a third night in Brooklyn Center this Tuesday as the latest police killing of a black unarmed man further fueled the tensions in a U.S. city already on edge because of the George Floyd murder trial. Also in the United States, prosecutors rested their case on Tuesday at the murder trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin after 11 days of testimony. As part of the case, a huge amount of video depicting George Floyd's final moments was played to the jury, including bystander footage and police body camera video, showing how Chauvin held his knee to Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes. Medical experts testified that Floyd died of a lack of oxygen because his breathing was constricted as he was held down on his stomach, with his hands cuffed behind his back and his face jammed against the ground. The defense has begun representing this case, arguing that Floyd died because of his illegal drug use and heart condition, and not because Chauvin pinned him to the pavement. The defense is expected to finish representing this case this week. La Soufrière volcano, located on the Caribbean island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, fired an enormous amount of ash and hot gas early on Monday, in the biggest explosive eruption since volcanic activity began late last week. There were no immediate reports of injuries or death, but government officials rushed to respond to the latest eruption. Roughly 16,000 people who live in communities close to the volcano were evacuated under government orders last Thursday, but an unknown number have remained behind and refused to move. Checkpoints are now in place, and residents of St. Vincent are not allowed to cross into the denominated red zone that surrounds the volcano. Several neighboring countries have offered logistical support and humanitarian aid in the face of the natural disaster. Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves has expressed gratitude for the multiple gestures of solidarity and noted that it could take 4 months for life to go back to normal in St. Vincent, part of an island chain that includes Germany's. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The Bolivian government launched an international campaign this Tuesday to demand the waiver of patents for vaccines and drugs against COVID-19. The proposal was presented by Foreign Minister Rogelio Mayra at a meeting in La Paz with diplomats accredited in the country and made public at a press conference held after the meeting. The Foreign Minister noted that there are dozens of pharmaceutical companies around the world that are in a position to manufacture vaccines, but they cannot do so because of intellectual property rights. He stressed that faced with such a serious emergency for humanity, any obstacle must be overcome so that vaccines can be manufactured in all parts of the world to ensure equitable access that guarantees global action against the disease is effective. Uruguay has reported a 24-hour record coronavirus death toll, having gone from one of the least affected countries to registering the highest number of new daily cases per capita in the world. Government data released late Monday show a record 71 deaths in the previous 24 hours, bringing the total to 1,533 in the country of 3.4 million inhabitants. The figures are still low compared to many other nations in the region, but some 1,300 of the fatalities, or nearly 90%, have been registered since January this year, and a third in April alone. Long held up as an example in the fight against COVID-19, Uruguay has never imposed a curfew or lockdown, despite calls from some health experts, and businesses, bars, and restaurants remain open. In Paraguay, where hospitals have been overwhelmed for weeks, the coronavirus pandemic has reached its most deadly moment so far. Health authorities have warned that the record number of COVID-19 related fatalities could continue to rise.
What hurts the most is to hear that there are people who still don't believe in this disease. That's what hurts the most. That they tell you that it doesn't exist when you are suffering the opposite here. Families destroyed day by day, desperate to get a bed, to get support for their relatives or no. They do not get it. We are over capacity, despite being the largest hospital in the country. We are being overwhelmed by COVID. So far, we are not seeing citizens collaborating with us regarding the use of the mask, social distancing, and fundamentally by complying with the protocols. We are all going through very complicated situations. We hear from friends, relatives, neighbors, who do not have medication, that there is not good care.
Colombian President Iván Duque announced on Tuesday that the cities of Bogotá, Medellín, Santa Marta, and Barranquilla will be in lockdown over the weekend in an attempt to halt the advance of a third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the case of Bogotá and Medellín, the lockdown will be implemented from Thursday at midnight. As a result of the measures, only people working in essential sectors, such as health or food, will be allowed to go out, and only one person per family will be allowed to go out to buy food, medicine, or basic goods. Since the end of March, authorities have imposed and tightened nighttime restrictions in an effort to tackle a new coronavirus outbreak. However, COVID-19 infections and fatalities have continued to rise. Since the first case was detected in March 2020, the country has registered almost 2.6 million infections and over 66,000 deaths. Mexico has started recruiting volunteers for the first clinical trials of its own coronavirus vaccine named Patria. The director of the National Council of Science and Technology stated that over 90 healthy volunteers of different ages are participating in the first test. This development stage of the Patria vaccine will be carried out in coordination with the Secretariat of Health. The official also informed that the estimated dates for the Phase 2 clinical trials are set for the month of June and July, and the third phase will be conducted between the months of August and September.
We have a very solid basis for confidence that this development can become a Mexican vaccine development, allowing us to defend ourselves against this disease, COVID-19.
Having it is not a small thing, because now those who produce vaccines, they decide whether to allow those vaccines to leave their territories or not. There are countries that have not allowed vaccines that they produce to go out.
United States health authorities have called to pause the administration of the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine after 6 women reported blood clots after receiving the shot. The alleged incidents coincide with similar events in Europe involving the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration issued a joint statement alongside the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, explaining that the events occurred between 1 and 2 weeks after the vaccine was administered. The recipients of the jab that developed the blood clots were women aged between 18 and 48. Nearly 7 million people in the United States have received the Johnson & Johnson shots so far, according to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And we have more stories coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Somalia's lower house of parliament on Monday voted to extend the president's mandate for 2 years, after months of deadlock over the holding of elections in the fragile nation. However, the Speaker of the Senate upper house, which will normally have to approve this legislation, immediately slammed the move as unconstitutional. The country has been in a constitutional crisis since the mandate of President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed, better known for his nickname Farmajo, ran out in February. Farmajo and the leaders of Somalia's 5 semi-autonomous federal states have reached an agreement in September that paved the way for indirect parliamentary and presidential elections in late 2020 and early 2021. But it fell apart as the arguments erupted over how to conduct the vote, and multiple rounds of talks have failed to break the impasse between Mogadishu and the states. Farmajo's bid to extend his mandate goes against the calls for international community, which has urged for immediate elections to be held. Almost 1 million people face severe hunger in northern Mozambique, where hundreds of thousands have fled Islamist militant attacks, the United Nations Food Agency stated on Tuesday. The World Food Programme noted in brief that 950,000 people are now hungry in Mozambique and appealed to donors from $82 million to confront the crisis. The appeal came a day after Mozambique's National Institute for Disaster Risk Management and Reduction said it needed $126 million to help those fleeing violence in the gas-rich Cabo Delgado province, which recently saw an attack in Palma town. UNICEF said it was currently caring for more than 200 displaced children whose parents could not be found. In Niger, 20 school children were burned to death in a fire in several classrooms in Straw Hut in Niamey, as announced by the commander of Niger's fire department on state television this Tuesday. According to reports citing witnesses, the fire broke out around 4 p.m. when the victims were in class. The origin of the fire is unknown. Niger's prime minister visited the scene of the tragedy on the outskirts of the capital and offered his condolences to the parents. To remedy the lack of classrooms in the country, authorities are building thousands of straw huts where children take classes, sometimes sitting on the ground. Fires in these highly flammable classrooms are common, but rarely result in casualties. During a joint press conference in the Iranian capital this Tuesday, Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov condemned new European Union sanctions against a group of Iranian officials, which come at the same time that negotiations are underway with European powers and the US to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal.
If the European Union lacks any sort of coordination and its right hand doesn't know what its left is doing, that is a tragedy. But if this decision was consciously made to be taken in the midst of the negotiations to save the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in Vienna, then it's a tragedy, but it's a mistake, which, as you know, is worse than a crime. We condemn any attempts to undermine the difficult process that is underway in Vienna between all the participants of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. We hope that our European colleagues understand the unacceptability of such sanctions and will take measures to prevent a breakdown in the talks. Our position is clear. and it's unified with that of our Iranian friends. All unilateral sanctions of that Washington enacted in violation of the JCPOA must be categorically annulled.
Iran will speed up its uranium enriching program to record levels in response to the latest attacks against its nuclear facilities. The uranium enrichment in the country will now reach a record 60%, and 1,000 new centrifuges will be added to the nuclear facilities in Natanz, as announced by Iranian negotiator Abbas Araghchi on Tuesday. The move comes in response to the blackout and explosion that took place over the weekend in Natanz. Tehran blames the Israeli regime for the sabotage. The new level of enrichment is still below the capacity needed to produce nuclear weapons. Iran is also reacting to new sanctions imposed by the European Union against government officials, precisely when negotiators in Vienna are trying to push the United States to re-enter the nuclear agreement of 2015. This Tuesday, the Russian defense minister stressed that the United States and its NATO allies have enhanced their military presence in the Arctic and on Russia's western and southern borders as part of the escalation of the military encirclement of the country.
US and NATO allies troops moved from Europe to Russian borders. Principal forces are concentrated on the Black Sea and the Baltic regions. Overall, about 40,000 military forces and 15,000 pieces of military equipment and vehicles are focused next to our territory. In particular, strategic aviation. With in-control activities and exercises, we carried out military readiness of troops in western and southern military districts during the winter season of education. For 3 weeks, 2 armies and 3 troops of airborne forces were successfully deployed to western borders of the Russian Federation. To strengthen the defense of the Russian Federation and the defense of national interests in the Arctic, the Ministry of Defense carries out a systematic work of the enhancement of combat capabilities of the Northern Fleet.
And the U.S. President Joe Biden has decided to leave American troops in Afghanistan beyond the May 1st deadline that was negotiated with the Taliban by the Trump administration, while setting a new date for the withdrawal to coincide with the 20th anniversary of the September 11 attacks. Biden had been hinting for weeks that they would let the deadline pass, claiming that an orderly withdrawal of the remaining 2,500 U.S. troops in Afghanistan will be difficult. The decision risks retaliation by the Taliban, with the possibility of escalating the 20-year war in a context in which various other armed groups are already escalating attacks in the country. And we have come to the end of Business Brief, but remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys QUESADA. Thank you for watching.